Thank you, Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. It is an honor to address the General Assembly today and present to you the annual report of the Human Rights Council. I wish to begin by extending my congratulations to the newly elected members of the Human Rights Council who will take up their position on the 1st of January of 2026. The Human Rights Council annual report and its addendum before you contain the Council's 137 resolutions, decisions and President's statement adopted at its 3 regular sessions and 1 special session in 2025. This year, the Council was in regular sessions for 14.5 weeks. Since January, the Council held 6 intersessional meetings on various topics, including on human rights and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and on the incompatibility between democracy and racism. The Council also held a special session in February 2025 on the situation of human rights in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in which it decided to establish a fact-finding mission and an independent commission of inquiry to investigate the human rights violations and abuses and violations of international humanitarian law committed in the provinces of North Kivu and South Kivu. During the 60th session, the Council held an urgent debate to discuss the military aggression carried out by the State of Israel against the State of Qatar. Madam President, distinguished delegates, this year, once again, the Human Rights Council expanded the scope of human rights issues on its agenda, which also entail a range of new mandated activities. The Council continued to focus its attention on technical assistance and capacity building in relation to Cambodia, the Central African Republic, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Georgia, Haiti, Libya, Mali, Somalia, South Sudan, Ukraine, and Yemen. Of course, the sessions of the Council took place against the backdrop of the UN's liquidity crisis and financial constraints. The Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights informed the Council that it was unable to implement several mandates due to the continued impact of liquidity crisis. More broadly, all mandates, both thematic and country-specific, have been affected, with many of them now being delivered in a reduced form. Similarly, subsidiary bodies of the Council have also been impacted by the crisis, with several of them having to postpone their annual sessions. The current situation is not sustainable. We need to close the gap between mandated activities and resources available. On the one hand, we must redouble our efforts with regards to rationalization and efficiency of the Council's work. On the other hand, we still need to invest in human rights and reaffirm our commitment to their protection. Without the timely and adequate provision of resources, fulfilling the Council's mandate will be severely hampered, thus creating protection gaps for victims of human rights violations. Madam President, distinguished delegates, several of the resolutions adopted by the Council made recommendations to the General Assembly. Resolution 58-2 on the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and the obligation to ensure accountability and justice, invites the General Assembly to consider establishing an ongoing international, impartial and independent mechanism to assist in the investigation and prosecution of persons responsible for the most serious crimes under international law committed by all parties in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel since 2014, to closely cooperate with the Commission of Inquiry, to collect, consolidate, preserve and analyze evidence of violations of international law and violations and abuses of human rights, and to prepare case files in order to facilitate and expedite fair and independent criminal proceedings in accordance with international legal standards in national, regional and international courts or tribunals that have or may in the future have jurisdiction over these crimes in accordance with international law. Resolution 5820 on the situation of human rights in Myanmar recommends that the General Assembly submit the reports of the High Commissioner and the Special Rapporteur to the relevant United Nations bodies, including the Security Council, for their consideration and appropriate action, taking into account the relevant conclusions and recommendations therein. Resolution 6016 on a global call for concrete action against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia and related intolerance recommends that the General Assembly decide at its 80th session to organize a one-day high-level plenary event to mark the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, to be held during the high-level segment of the Assembly's 81st session with the theme of mobilizing global support for the full and effective implementation of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action, consisting of an opening plenary meeting with the participation of heads of state and government, followed by consecutive thematic panel discussions, culminating in the adoption of a concise political declaration aimed at mobilizing political will at the national, regional, and international levels for the full and effective implementation of and follow-up to the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action. Madam President, distinguished delegates, let me now turn to the Council's Universal Periodic Review mechanism. Since the start of its fourth cycle in November 2022, the UPR has conducted a peer review of 125 UN member states, during which states have presented progress and challenges in the implementation of their human rights obligations and received recommendations on further steps to take in that regard. The fourth cycle is expected to be concluded in July 2027 at the 65th session of the Human Rights Council. Equal treatment of all states being its principle, the UPR remains one of the unquestionable successes of the Council, as demonstrated by the increasing number of recommendations being addressed to each member state and a significant and steady average acceptance rate of recommendations. Regrettably, earlier this year, 3 member states disengaged from the Council, 2 of which have not yet completed their fourth UPR cycle. At this critical juncture, it is crucial to deploy all efforts to continue to support this unique multilateral process that is mandated by the General Assembly. The UPR is generally recognized as enabling constructive dialogue on human rights on an all-equal footing for all countries and the sharing of good practices. It provides avenues for technical cooperation with a view to improving the human rights situation worldwide, not least through its voluntary trust funds. The special procedures are another key mechanism of the Human Rights Council. They provide one of the main sources of up-to-date, reliable information on human rights issues and situations around the world. I encourage all of you to take full advantage of their findings and recommendations, which can prove especially useful in early warning and prevention efforts. I wish to take the opportunity to emphasize the importance for all countries to cooperate with and provide full access to special procedures. I invite all states that have not yet done so to consider issuing standing invitations to all the special procedures mandate holders. As of October 2025, 128 member states and 1 observer state have extended a standing invitation to thematic special procedures. In this context, I would like to reiterate my deep concern about acts of intimidation, personal attacks, and even sanctions against special procedures mandate holders. Such practices are not compatible with the spirit of cooperation and dialogue that should guide our work. They illustrate the considerable challenges that these experts sometimes face in the exercise of their duties, often in particularly sensitive and complex contexts. Mandate holders are an essential tool of the Council for the promotion and protection of all human rights around the world. I therefore call on all member states to cooperate fully with them and to refrain from any acts of intimidation, reprisals, or coercive measures that could impede their work. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, grâce au soutien apporté par le Fonds d'affectation spéciale qui soutient la participation des pays les moins avancés et des petits États insulaires en développement aux travaux du Conseil, 26 délégués ont pu participer aux sessions du Conseil en 2025. La participation du plus grand nombre possible d'États membres de l'ONU est un objectif important pour garantir que le dialogue au Conseil reflète au mieux le principe d'universalité et d'objectivité qui lui est imposé. Ce programme apporte de nouvelles voies et plus de légitimité au Conseil. Il contribue également à renforcer les capacités en matière de droits de l'homme de ces États. Néanmoins, le Fonds d'affectation spéciale ne peut fonctionner qu'avec le soutien des pays donateurs dont les contributions financières témoignent de leur engagement en faveur de la participation universelle aux forums multilatéraux. La récente diminution des contributions rend de plus en plus difficile pour le Fonds de maintenir le même niveau de soutien aux bénéficiaires participant aux sessions du Conseil. Dans cet esprit, je souhaite exprimer ma profonde gratitude aux donateurs actuels et lancer un appel aux pays donateurs potentiels afin qu'ils renforcent leur engagement financier envers le Fonds pour que la vision d'une participation universelle de tous les États membres de l'ONU au Conseil continue de devenir une réalité. Permettez-moi d'évoquer aussi les activités et les travaux du Conseil sur l'accessibilité. Les travaux de sa task force sur l'accessibilité pour les personnes handicapées s'inscrivent pleinement dans la stratégie des Nations Unies pour l'inclusion des personnes handicapées et traduit une contribution concrète du Conseil à la réalisation de l'objectif de la pleine participation des personnes handicapées. En 2025, le Conseil a organisé un nombre record de 15 réunions débats, un dialogue interactif, une réunion d'intercession et un atelier d'experts avec interprétation en langue de signes et sous-titrage. Ces débats couvrent un large éventail de sujets, bien au-delà des seuls droits des personnes handicapées. Intégrer l'accessibilité signifie s'assurer qu'elle soit pleinement prise en compte dans l'ensemble des discussions relatives aux droits de l'homme. Le Conseil a également examiné 18 de rapports présentés dans des formes accessibles et faciles à lire. L'utilisation de la langue des signes et les services de sous-titrage ne sont actuellement fournis que lorsqu'ils sont mandatés. Nous continuons donc, la Task Force et moi-même, à appeler les États qui parrainent des résolutions à demander que les discussions soient rendues accessibles. Je ne peux vous parler des travaux et des succès du Conseil sans insister sur la contribution essentielle de la société civile et des organisations intergouvernementales. La société civile joue un rôle fondamental pour faire en sorte que les délibérations du Conseil restent pertinentes et proches de la réalité du terrain. Elles ont aussi un rôle primordial à jouer dans les efforts de suivi et de renforcement des capacités dans leur pays d'origine. Il est donc essentiel de maintenir l'espace pour la participation active de la société civile au Conseil. J'encourage tous les États à prendre les mesures nécessaires pour prévenir et protéger contre les actes d'intimidation et de représailles à l'encontre des ONG qui coopèrent avec le Conseil et d'autres organes des Nations Unies. L'ONU doit aussi prendre ses responsabilités afin de garantir et faciliter pour ceux et celles qui ont les autorisations nécessaires l'accès aux enceintes multilatérales pertinentes. Il en va de la viabilité et de la particularité de l'écosystème genevois. Avant de conclure, je souhaiterais aborder la question du réexamen du statut du Conseil par votre Assemblée. Conformément à la résolution 65-281, l'Assemblée générale a prévu de procéder à ce réexamen à un moment opportun, au moins 10 ans et au plus 15 ans après l'adoption de ladite résolution. L'Assemblée s'était ainsi fixée pour l'objectif de l'achever entre juin 2021 et juin 2026. Je suis convaincu que seul un partenariat étroit entre l'Assemblée et le Conseil des droits de l'homme permettra d'atteindre les résultats escomptés par la résolution 65-281. Lors du précédent réexamen en 2011, l'Assemblée générale et le Conseil des droits de l'homme avaient travaillé en concertation sur la question du statut. Le président de l'Assemblée avait alors désigné un point focal cherché des relations entre Genève et New York. Ces deux processus, menés respectivement à Genève et à New York, avaient été caractérisés par un haut degré d'harmonisation et de respect mutuel. Madam President, Excellencies, this year's commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations is both a moment for self-reflection and a call to action. We found ourselves in tumultuous times, facing vast and complex human rights challenges, with conflicts continuing to emerge or endure, and with the erosion of the rule of law and good governance. Fulfilling the rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of 1948 can often feel like an impossible task. Yet, we must also recognize the remarkable progress achieved over these 8 decades across the full spectrum of human rights: civil, political, economic, social, and cultural. The global human rights framework and institutional architecture we have built together enables us to better understand, respond to, and alleviate human rights issues around the world. As human rights have become increasingly interlinked with development, peace, and security, our approach must be holistic, engaging all relevant actors and institutions to fulfill the mandate entrusted to us. Human rights are neither superfluous nor a luxury. They are essential for any society's stability and prosperity. We have seen time and again what happens when that truth is neglected. I like to quote, and I do it again today, former Secretary General Kofi Annan, who said, "There is no peace without development, there is no development without peace, and there is no peace nor development without human rights." These words of wisdom must guide our work as we navigate through the UN 80 process. Madam President, dear friends, allow me to conclude by expressing my gratitude. It has been a profound privilege to serve as President of the Human Rights Council over the course of this year. Thank you very much for being here this morning.